On November 1st, 2025, the air in St. Peter's Square was electric. Crowds pressed against the barriers, journalists whispered, cameras rolled, and then, in a single breath that would echo across centuries, the proclamation was made. St. John Henry Newman is declared the 38th Doctor of the Universal Church. For a moment, silence fell over the Vatican. This was the man who once stood accused of betraying his own church, a man shunned by friends, doubted by scholars, misunderstood by his nation. Now, Rome was honoring him as one of her greatest teachers, placing his name beside Augustine, Aquinas, and Teresa of Avila. How did a man once called traitor become doctor? What truth did he uncover that the world had tried to forget? And more importantly, if truth led him here, where might it lead you? To understand this moment, we return to early 19th century England, a nation proud of intellect, yet divided in spirit. Factories roared, cities rose, and the air was thick with the smoke of new ideas. The Industrial Revolution had not only reshaped the landscape but also the soul of a people. Faith, once the pulse of English life, was now shadowed by the growing confidence of science and the chill of skepticism. The Church of England stood caught between reverence for the past and the pressures of a restless modern age. Out of Oxford University, a small circle of priests and scholars began to ask dangerous questions that would rattle the foundations of English religion. They called themselves the Oxford Movement. Their mission: to recover the lost fire of ancient Christianity, to restore holiness, tradition, and the authority of the early church fathers to a world that had forgotten them. Among them was a young fellow of Oriel College, John Henry Newman. Born in 1801, he was brilliant in intellect, poetic in spirit, disciplined in thought. His students adored him. His sermons, delivered at St. Mary's in Oxford, drew crowds who came not just to hear a priest, but to feel conviction. He preached that faith was not comfort but confrontation, not tradition alone but truth alive. Yet beneath his calm and reasoned words, Newman wrestled with an unease that he could not silence. Every study of history, every reflection on the early church, drew him closer to an uncomfortable conclusion: that the roots of Christianity he loved ran deeper than England, deeper than the Reformation, deeper even than the theology he defended. He began to see that the faith of the first centuries, the faith of the saints, the martyrs, the apostles, had an unbroken line that led straight to Rome. But to follow that line meant to risk everything: his position, his reputation, even his friends. His letters from this period show the turmoil of a soul torn between obedience to conscience and loyalty to his community. Newman once wrote, "To be deep in history is to cease to be Protestant." Those words would become the spark that set fire to his world. As his sermons grew bolder, criticism mounted. The very church he sought to renew began to turn against him. Colleagues whispered that he had gone too far, that his admiration for the church fathers was a mask for Roman sympathies. The pressure built. The corridors of Oxford grew cold with distance and suspicion. And in the quiet of his study, Newman stared at the crucifix on his wall and whispered the question that had followed him all his life: where is the fullness of truth? What he would soon discover would cost him everything: his home, his career, and the comfort of belonging. No one knew that heaven was about to answer, in the most unexpected way. The 1840s arrived like a storm. England buzzed with invention and debate. Yet in Newman's heart a greater upheaval was taking place. Every page of the early church fathers spoke with a voice older and clearer than the one he had known. Irenaeus, Augustine, Athanasius. Their witness formed a single chorus, pointing beyond the walls of Anglicanism to a unity preserved in Rome. In 1841, his pen gave birth to the most controversial of the Oxford Tracts, Tract 90. Its argument was daring. The 39 Articles of the Church of England, long used to distance itself from Rome, could be read in a Catholic sense. The tract spread across Oxford like wildfire. To his admirers it was brilliant. To his enemies, betrayal. The university censured him. Friends avoided him in the streets. Sermons that once filled pews now met cold silence. For 4 years he withdrew from public life, retreating with a small band of followers to Littlemore, a quiet village outside Oxford. There, in solitude and prayer, he wrestled with the last remnants of doubt that he read. He wrote. He paced beneath the crucifix that hung in his narrow cell. Each passing day brought him closer to a truth he could no longer deny. On the evening of October 9, 1845, the rain fell softly over Littlemore. A worn-out traveler approached the gate, an Italian Passionist missionary named Father Dominic Barberi. His cassock was soaked, his hands shivering from the cold English wind. Newman welcomed him inside. The two men knelt in the dim light of the oratory. For a moment neither spoke. Then, with trembling hands and a voice steady from conviction, Newman said, "I wish to be received into the one, holy, Catholic and Apostolic Church." Father Barberi extended his hands, prayed the ancient formula, and traced the sign of the cross. The moment was simple, almost hidden. Yet heaven itself seemed to pause. In that silence the long struggle ended. The scholar who had challenged Rome became her son. The critic became the convert. The restless seeker finally found rest. That night, as the candles burned low, Newman wrote in his diary only a single line: "The end of one life, the beginning of another." The man who had shaken Oxford now walked a new and lonelier road, guided not by reputation, but by truth. News of Newman's conversion spread like wildfire across England. The shock was immediate, the reactions fierce. To the Anglicans, it felt like treason. To his old friends at Oxford, the brilliant mind who once defended the Church of England had crossed a forbidden line in pamphlets and newspapers. His name became a weapon: traitor, papist, Roman sympathizer. The England that once applauded him now turned its back. Yet to the Catholics of the time, he was not yet a saint, merely a newcomer, a soul in transition. Many welcomed him cautiously, as one welcomes a stranger with potential. Rome, for its part, watched with quiet attention. Could this intellectual convert truly serve the church he once criticized? Newman answered not with speeches, but with a life of work. He settled in Birmingham, far from Oxford's grandeur, and founded the Oratory of St. Philip Neri, a house of prayer, study, and service. There he lived simply, hearing confessions, writing letters, mentoring young priests, and pouring his thoughts into pages that would outlive him. The years that followed became his silent investigation, a testing not by laboratory or tribunal, but by time, humility, and perseverance. His pen never rested. He wrote the idea of a university, a vision for Catholic higher education rooted not in control, but in intellectual freedom illuminated by faith. He wrote an essay on the development of Christian doctrine, arguing that the truths of faith, like a living organism, grow and mature without changing their essence. And he wrote the Grammar of Assent, his masterpiece on how the human mind assents to truth, not through blind faith, but through moral reasoning and conscience. Each book was a new chapter in his defense of Catholicism, not as superstition, but as the synthesis of reason and revelation. His enemies accused him of intellectual manipulation. His supporters saw in him a mind that could explain mystery without emptying it of wonder. When the First Vatican Council convened in 1870, the Church debated one of the most controversial doctrines in history, papal infallibility. Newman was not present in Rome, yet his influence hovered over the discussion. He affirmed the Pope's teaching authority but warned that infallibility was no license for tyranny. He argued that conscience, rightly formed, is not rebellion against the Pope but the echo of divine law within the soul. This balance of obedience and intellect earned him respect even among skeptics. The decades rolled on, and so did Newman's quiet labor. He endured sickness, misunderstanding, and isolation, but never bitterness. His motto remained, "Sor ad sor loquitur," heart speaks unto heart. Then, in 1879, when Newman was 78 years old, Pope Leo XIII summoned him to Rome in a gesture that shocked even his critics. The Pope elevated him to the rank of cardinal, without requiring him to be a bishop, an extraordinary sign of esteem. The crowd that once mocked him now applauded. His red cardinal's hat became not a symbol of status, but of vindication, the Church acknowledging that his struggle, his intellect, his conscience had served her faithfully. He returned to England a humbled man, writing, "The cloud is lifted forever." When John Henry Newman died on August 11, 1890, the crowds that had once rejected him lined the streets of Birmingham. His funeral procession stretched for miles. And yet, even as the Church celebrated him, the story was not finished. His writings continued to speak long after his death, shaping theologians of the 20th century, inspiring educators, guiding the spirit of Vatican II, and rekindling the harmony of faith and reason for a new age in lecture halls. His name was whispered as that of a prophet ahead of his time. In Rome, his cause was studied, and in the hearts of believers, his words awakened a deeper hunger for truth. Still, one question remained in the Vatican. Could this English convert, once doubted by both camps, truly be declared a doctor of the Church? The answer would come, but only when the world itself was ready to listen. The process was long, decades of reading, verifying, and discerning. Within the walls of the Vatican, theologians of the Congregation for the Causes of Saints and the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith opened his works. Thousands of pages across sermons, essays, and letters, they searched for error, for pride, for even a whisper of heresy. They found none. What they discovered instead was a heart completely given to God and a mind surrendered to truth. His writings on the development of doctrine revealed that the faith of the Church is not static. It breathes, it unfolds, it grows, yet never abandons its roots. Newman had once written, "Growth is the only evidence of life." For him, truth was not fragile. It was alive, capable of meeting every new age without fear. Then came his profound defense of conscience, not as rebellion, but as divine responsibility. He called conscience the aboriginal vicar of Christ, the sacred voice of God echoing within every human heart at a time when blind obedience was often mistaken for holiness. Newman reminded the world that faith without conscience becomes tyranny, and conscience without faith becomes chaos. The Church began to realize that Newman's thought was not an echo of rebellion but a restoration of balance. His writings had anticipated the very spirit of Vatican II, the call for renewal without rupture. For reason illuminated by faith, he had become the bridge between the ancient and the modern, the mystic and the intellectual, the authority of Rome and the voice of the human soul. In October 2019, Pope Francis canonized him a saint before thousands in St. Peter's Square. The bells of Rome tolled for a man once exiled by his homeland. The crowd of pilgrims, scholars, priests, students, wept as his name was read among the saints. That it was the Church's way of saying, "We see you now, John Henry Newman. Your struggle was not in vain." Yet his story did not end with sainthood. 6 years later, in 2025, under Pope Leo XIV, the Church took one more step. After years of theological investigation, after comparisons with the greatest teachers of history, Augustine, Aquinas, Gregory, Teresa, Catherine, Therese, a declaration was made. We proclaim St. John Henry Newman as Doctor of the Universal Church, the 38th in 2 millennia. Only 37 had carried that title before him, giants of faith who shaped the doctrine of ages. Now, a man from Oxford, once accused of betrayal, stood among them. But why him? Why now, in a world drowning in information yet starving for truth? Because Newman's theology speaks directly to our time. A time when many have replaced conviction with convenience and conscience with opinion. He bridged faith and reason, showing that the two do not compete. They complete one another. He taught that truth is not a cage, but a compass. It does not limit freedom, it defines it. His motto still echoes, Sor ad sor loquitur. Heart speaks unto heart. That it was more than words. It was his mission, to speak the truth of God in a way that pierced the intellect and stirred the soul. Today, he is known as the patron of Catholic education, of scholars and seekers who refuse to separate learning from faith. In universities, his name marks foundations and lecture halls. In seminaries, his writings guide formation. And in Birmingham, at the oratory he built, pilgrims still kneel by his tomb. Students, priests, skeptics, and believers, whispering prayers of guidance, asking for courage to think, to believe, to act. Some come out of curiosity. Others leave in tears. Because standing before the resting place of Newman is to confront your own mind, to ask whether your faith is alive or merely memorized. If truth still matters to you, don't scroll away. Don't sit in the comfort of disbelief while others carry the weight of defending what's sacred. Subscribe now to Catholicism. Because if you won't stand for truth today, the world will gladly teach you a lie tomorrow. And Newman would remind you, it is not enough to believe in truth. You must live it, even when it costs you everything. Not everyone celebrated Newman's elevation. In some corners of academia and even within church circles, whispers of discontent stirred again. Echoes of the same skepticism that followed him in life. Certain theologians argued that Newman's philosophy, with its idea of doctrinal development, risked opening the door to modernism, that subtle poison that twists growth into compromise. They accused him of planting seeds that could blur the boundaries of unchanging truth. Others, however, saw the opposite. They called him the mind that saved faith from intellectual suicide. They believed that without Newman, Catholicism might have hardened into isolation. Rejecting science, progress, and dialogue. To them, Newman was not a risk but a remedy, the bridge that kept faith alive in the age of reason. The truth, however, lies in the tension between both. Newman never sought to modernize the gospel to please men. He sought to awaken the mind to see the eternal truth already hidden within it. He did not bend the faith to fit modernity. He lifted modernity toward faith. He once wrote, "To live is to change, and to be perfect is to have changed often." But for Newman, change was not surrender. It was sanctification. It meant growth in grace, the refinement of understanding, the deepening of conviction, the purification of the soul's grasp of divine mystery. He never spoke of abandoning truth, but of watching it bloom. He believed that just as a seed unfolds into a tree without losing its essence, so the doctrines of the Church unfold over centuries, revealing greater beauty without changing their core. As debates over his legacy continued, Pope Leo XIV's declaration in 2025 became more than a ceremonial title. It was a signal, deliberate and prophetic, that it said to the Church and to the modern world alike, "Reason without faith leads to emptiness. Faith without reason leads to fanaticism." In a world torn between blind skepticism and blind belief, Newman's life stands as a luminous middle path, the harmony of intellect and devotion. He proved that the pursuit of knowledge need not destroy faith, and that true faith welcomes knowledge as its ally, not its enemy. The Pope's decree resounded like a challenge to every believer, every scholar, every skeptic who dared to think. It was a reminder that truth is not afraid of examination. It invites it. Newman himself had lived that principle. He questioned, he doubted, he studied, not to escape faith, but to enter it more deeply. The debates that followed his declaration only confirmed his relevance. Universities hosted symposiums on his thought. Catholic and Anglican theologians revisited his writings, finding bridges where before they saw division. Secular philosophers, intrigued by his logic, quoted him with admiration, sometimes reluctantly, but always respectfully. And while critics argued, his words continued to move quietly through the hearts of those seeking balance between reason and revelation. He showed that truth does not demand silence. It demands integrity. He showed that faith does not fear questions. It fears dishonesty. Newman had once said, 10,000 difficulties do not make one doubt. That sentence alone dismantled centuries of false conflict between faith and reason. For him, difficulty was not disbelief. It was the beginning of deeper understanding. And perhaps that is why his story endures. Because it is the story of a man who refused to choose between thinking and believing, who proved that the two, when united, illuminate the path to God. He did not water down faith for modernity. He lit a lamp in its darkness, a lamp that still burns in classrooms, pulpits, and hearts, reminding the Church that truth, when spoken with love and courage, never grows old. Maybe the real miracle is not what happened in Rome, but what can happen in you. For the story of John Henry Newman is not just about intellect or theology. It is about obedience, courage, and the cost of conviction. He followed truth wherever it led, even when it led him away from comfort, away from applause, and into the unknown. He listened to conscience when it was easier to conform, and because of that, his name lives as a witness that holiness begins not in grand gestures, but in quiet fidelity. Newman's journey asks you a question no one else can answer. Do you believe truth enough to sacrifice for it? Will you follow conscience even when it costs you your comfort, your pride, your reputation? Because faith that costs nothing changes nothing. Faith without challenge is sentiment. Faith without risk is just tradition. The same God who led Newman from Oxford to Rome, through loneliness, misunderstanding, and fire, still calls you today not into routine belief but into transformation, out of lukewarm faith into flame. If you won't subscribe after this, ask yourself why.is it because you fear that truth will change you, or because somewhere deep inside you already know it will? Drop your answer in the comments. Let your conscience speak. From shadows and images into the truth, that was Newman's journey. A lifetime of searching, of questioning, of surrendering, ending not in confusion, but in clarity, from doubt to doctrine, from Oxford's cloisters to the altars of Rome, from the noise of rejection to the stillness of sainthood. His life became a bridge between heart and mind, between faith and reason, between the old and the new. Newman proved that belief is not the enemy of thought, it is its fulfillment. That the soul's deepest questions are not silenced by faith, but answered through it. His life remains a living challenge to a world drowning in opinions but starving for truth. As Pope Leo XIV declared on that historic day in 2025, the Church needs thinkers who pray and believers who think. That is why Newman matters. He reminds us that holiness is not found in escape from reason, but in the courage to let reason kneel before mystery. His lamp still burns in every classroom where faith meets inquiry, in every soul torn between comfort and conviction, in every believer who dares to follow truth, whatever the cost. If this story awakened your faith, share it. If it stirred something inside you that you can't quite name, don't let it fade. Subscribe to Catholicism, where ancient faith meets timeless truth. Because the Church's story did not end in Rome, it continues in you.